Hello and welcome to lesson 1 on attachment, early interactions. We're going to look at reciprocity and interaction with synchrony, two types of early interaction. Quick look at the spec. You need to know caregiver-infant interactions, specifically name reciprocity and interaction with synchrony, and then we'll go on to stages of attachment later. But what is attachment? It's a word that we use in common parlance. Well, attachment is an emotional bond between two people that is shown or demonstrated in their behavior. It's a two-way process. So a bond would be something like the emotional tie that a mother has to her offspring, to her infant, or that even two adults have to each other. In this case, we're going to focus on the adult-infant or adult-child bond. Interaction with synchrony then, and reciprocity. Reciprocity comes from the word to reciprocate. Reciprocate means that if I give you a present, you would reciprocate that by giving me a present. If I give you a compliment, you reciprocate by giving me a compliment. It's kind of like turn-takings, copying almost, a bit like imitation. So reciprocity is the idea of responding to an action of another with a similar action, when the action of one partner elicits a response from the other partner. So from a baby's point of view, this would be interacting with the baby and the baby interacting back with you, reciprocity. It's kind of like imitation. It's linked to imitation, that a baby will replicate or an adult will replicate the behavior demonstrated by the other. One study that investigated this reciprocity idea was Meltzoff and Moore. They carried out controlled observation of infants that were 12 to 21 days old, and these infants were responding to a series of different stimuli. So basically the researcher would stand in front of them and stick their tongue out at them and pull faces, and they were looking to see if there was reciprocity, if the babies would imitate those behaviours. Independent observers were asked to watch the videotapes, so everything was recorded, and then the independent observers would try to categorize the infant's behavior, the baby's behavior, and according to a number of set behavioral categories such as tongue protruding, mouth opening, and so forth. It was found that babies' facial expressions matched the experimenters at above chance levels. So that means that if you stood in front of a baby pulling faces, even just down to chance, the baby is likely to imitate some of those unintentionally, just because the baby's constantly in motion and their face is constantly smiling and frowning and all sorts of different expressions. So just by chance, you would expect some imitation accidentally. However, Meltzoff and Moore argued for the above chance level that these babies were reciprocating the facial expressions pulled by the researchers. Slight tangent. This is a very controlled observation, and when we get to research methods, this is a really important area, is how do you actually carry out scientific observations given that they can be so subjective. One of the things the researchers really considered here was they used independent observers, and the reason why they did this is to avoid any sense of bias. So the investigators have a vested interest in producing positive results because it's their hypothesis. They'll get a claim and publish and all sorts of stuff like that. However, if you bring in objective observers, they don't have that same vested interest. They haven't spent months and years planning and carrying out the research. So there's a way of keeping it objective, and remember, objectivity is a crucial feature of science. Each observer also scored the tapes twice. So that's interesting, because what you would find is if you watched a video of the infant's behaviour and categorised it one way, but then later watched the same video again, categorised it a different way, you would expect low correlation between those two behavioural interpretations, and therefore your observations may not be reliable. Now, if everyone's doing that in a study, all the observers are doing that in the study, then the phenomena either doesn't exist or the method is flawed. If just one person is doing it in a study, one observer, then maybe they as an observer are unreliable. So it's a good way of assessing the reliability and to some extent the objectivity of the observation. Right, let's get back on track then. So another key early behaviour that we notice in infants is interactional synchrony. And this is when two people interact, they tend to mirror, there's a flow that goes between them, there's turn taking and things like that. Some researchers have described the bond between a mother and infant as similar to that between lovers. And the reason why is because there will be, gazes, cast and then broken, and it just looks very it's similar in terms of beats and tone to adult relationships in many ways. Okay, so those are some of the key ideas, and we'll come back to interactional synchrony in a minute. One limitation to the reciprocity idea specifically, Meltzoff and Moore, it comes from Piaget. Piaget argued that the imitation that Meltzoff and Moore were sort of experiencing, that type of imitation at that early stage, Piaget believed that to be pseudo imitation. So there's no decision making, there's no clear learning and replication happening. It's just a kind of reflex almost, a response training to stimuli. So the idea is any activity the child will respond to, and some of those responses will be similar. And the caregiver rewards imitation with positive reinforcement in a way that they don't reward behaviour that isn't imitative. So if you think about it, you smile at the baby and they smile back and you say, "Oh, well done, clever girl." If you smile at the baby and they frown, you'll be like, "Oh," and you don't reward it in the same way. So Piaget is saying it's sort of like stimulus response, behaviourist learning. However, Murray and Trevathan carry out a study that may contradict this. They took 2-month-old infants and they asked mothers to interact with their infant via a video monitor. Now, in half the conditions, in one condition, the mothers interacted in real time, so it was like live. In the other half, it was a pre-recorded tape of the mother not actually interacting with her infant, but pretending to. Here's what they found, which was quite interesting. The infants who had the recorded mothers began to show acute distress. They tried to attract their mother's interest, but failing to do so, they would turn away and become sullen. Now, this criticises Piaget's suggestion that it's just a kind of response training. If Piaget's right and it's just behaviourism, then actually the infants should have responded the same way to the live mother as they do to the pre-recorded mother, because it's just stimulus, but they don't. So we could argue that most of them are actually looking at real imitation. In another condition, mothers were asked to interact with their infants and then stop. And babies again, at a slightly different stage, but babies again became distressed and tried to elicit responses from the mother. So it does seem to be some relatively complex early interaction occurring. However, there are some evaluations of even going down this route. And one of the main issues is going to be the problems with testing infant behaviour. There's ethics involved. The infants themselves can't give consent, so you get consent from the parents. However, think about little Albert. Little Albert, we instilled a phobia in him for life. The consent of the parents in that case probably wasn't enough ethically. Reliability, tested behaviours occur frequently, so babies are constantly in motion, aren't they? And actually saying where a smile begins and a different facial expression ends is quite a challenge. Meltzoff have more used videos to try and make it more objective, so that's a strength. However, individual differences. Isabella et al. Argues strong attachment produce greater interactional synchrony. So as you may find, dependent on the types of babies used, more interactional synchrony or stronger reciprocity. Okay, this is a really important study. So this study came out in 2016. It was publicised widely on the radio at the time. And this is a study by Ostenbrook, who basically contradict the entire early interaction research. So, human infants were shown 11 gestures at 1, 3, 6 and 9 weeks of age. A longitudinal analysis was carried out, and this indicated the infants did not imitate any of the models, as they were just as likely to produce the gestures in response to control models, so non-humans. Now, not non-humans, non-interacting models. This undermines the idea that imitation is innate and that actually there's any real imitation, and brings Piaget back into the game. Pseudo-imitation at best. This is a really important study because of the date. More recent research that you can get your hands on, the stronger your evaluation is going to be. So that's a real flaw. If you want to extend your knowledge a bit beyond this, you might want to spend a bit of time researching the like-me hypothesis. This is linked to early interaction, but there's some good links there with later child development. Rightio. Further evaluation then. Let's evaluate the hell out of this. Kepke et al. 1983 failed to replicate Meltzoff and Moore. Meltzoff and Moore argued that the problems lied with Kepke in the methodology. Marin et al. Also tried to replicate Murray and Trevathan, and they said the procedure may have been responsible for the reason why they got different results. And Abravanel and DeYoung show 5 to 12 week babies, two objects that moved like a mouth opening and closing, and one sticking out its tongue, so it was like an artificial contraption. The babies failed to interact with them, suggesting actually that supporting Murray and Trevathan and Meltzoff and Moore in this idea that babies are geared to respond to human interaction rather than any other. And research by people like Fantz, which is worth looking at, and I'll talk to you about if you're interested, showed that babies certainly prefer human-like faces to the same array of features in a random order. To summarise then, early interactions, we've got interaction with synchrony, reciprocity and imitation. We've got Meltzoff and Moore study, which supports the reciprocity idea. Piaget criticises it as stimulus response. Murray and Trevathan support it by saying actually it's genuine interaction because they pre-record it and the babies don't behave the same way. Ostenbrook wiped the floor, essentially resetting the entire field now. And then we have a number of studies that failed to replicate the same results. As always, thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I will see you around.